Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. And if you are new here, then I would say welcome. This channel is not dedicated to any specific topic, but most of the time I upload database related videos, more specifically about MariaDB. And I do enjoy game development as well. And you might find some weird videos regarding Unreal Engine and some of the related stuff to that. But the main focus here is basically on MariaDB. So in this particular video, I'm planning to go through a very important topic when it comes to MariaDB is the global transaction IDs or GTID, right? So you might hear this term very often when you're talking about replication from one master to multiple slaves or one slave, or even if let's say you are talking about setting up a circular replication, or even when you talk about recovery from a disaster, then yeah, you would be talking about GTIDs. So we want to go through what exactly are GTIDs and how are they important and what are the different components when it comes to global transaction IDs or GTID in general. So I have a very simple setup here with one master and one slave. As you can see in the window above, we have max scale running, and we can see that there's a master and a slave, and then you will see that you are basically, you can see that there's a GTID last column where it's showing us that what's the current GTID for each of these nodes. So when you have a replicated setup, right? So when you have a master slave replication or a primary replica replication setup or an environment, you will see that the GTIDs are always supposed to be identical on all the terms, right? So on all the nodes, basically. So looking at the GTID, we can see that there are three parts to it, right? So first part is called the domain ID. So there is a very specific reason why do you want to set a particular domain ID, or you can even skip it altogether. So you may or may not want to set a domain ID, but there's a very specific use case why would you need a domain ID. So I would always recommend to have some value set for your domain ID. That's going to be very helpful, as we are going to see later on. And then the second part of the GTID is your server ID. So as we can see that the server ID is 1000. So generally, not generally, but always, this GTID is going to be pointing to this server ID is going to be pointing to your master's server ID. So in this case, we know that this node is a master node, or rather this node is a master node. So we can safely say that 1000 is the GTI, is the server ID of this master, right? So that's a very clear indication. So whenever you see, now you see that over here also for the slave also, we are seeing the same 1000 as the server ID, which basically means that this slave or server 2 is replicating the GTIDs from this master, So this master, of course, has a GTID of 1000. Even without looking at the server configurations, or even without looking at the show global variables like server ID. So even without doing that, you can already tell through max scale that 1000 is the server ID for the master node. There are some rare scenarios where you may see a different server ID on the master, meaning, for example, maybe you are seeing 2000 here or some other number here, but that may not be the server ID for this master. That is possible. Most likely, the server has just now converted from a slave to the master, so it still has the last GTID from. So for example, if let's say we were to do a failover now at this point in time, right? So if I was to stop this MariaDB node, then the master would point to this node automatically, because we have max scales configured for auto failover. So master would automatically point to that node. So let's do that very quickly, and I will show you what I was talking about in the previous sentence. So if I just do a stop MariaDB, then you will see that the node is down, and then in just a short while, this node will become a master, and you still see that the GTID over here is showing as 1000. The reason now we cannot say, looking at this, we cannot say that 1000 is the server ID for this node, right? So this is the node. So if I do a show global server ID, you can see it's 2000 right now. Not right now, but it is 2000 for this node. So yeah, so this max scale output is giving us the wrong impression. So you can say that this max scale is giving us the wrong server ID, which is not true. So it is just telling you the last GTID that has been applied to this particular node, right? So that is, of course, is still 1000 because we haven't done any new transaction on this node. So let's say I do a show global variables like for example GTID. If I just check that, so we can see that the GTID bin log position is the same. This one, the bin log state is also the same. The current position is also the same, and the slave position is also the same. So which means that there's nothing new has been applied to this particular node, right? So since this is the master node, now I can safely do maybe create a new database, for example. Maybe let's create that, and you will see something happen here in the GTIDs. All right. Okay. So now you see that now the GTID has increased, of course, and now we can see that yes, this server ID is now 100% confirmed the same server ID of this master, right? So this is telling us a clear picture. Now you can also see that the node that was down is at an older GTID, right? So it still is missing one transaction that was done on this master node, right? So now we can, if I were to start this node again, the node that was down, you will see that it will immediately catch up. Yeah, it will immediately catch up, and now it's also showing the same GTID as the master node. So this basically is a very simple example of having different GTIDs in the cluster. It is possible, but if you have replicated, if you have all the nodes working fine, working properly, then yes, then you will see, you ideally want to see the same GTID throughout, meaning across the cluster, right? So that's the important part here. Okay, so now looking at the GTID. So let's do one thing. I'm going to shut down this node again. Stop this MariaDB, not again, but for the first time, so that we can have the first node as a master again. I'm going to start this up again one more time. All right. So if I connect to MariaDB now, and if I do show global variables, I can't type at all, like GTID, not dollar. Yeah. So if I see that, we can see that we have a GTID bin log position that is currently showing this, and then we have a GTID bin log state, right? So this bin log state is going to tell us what are all the GTIDs that are available in the bin log. So yes, indeed, we can say that there are some GTIDs from the server ID 1000, and then there are some GTIDs from the server ID 2000 also, right? So the bin log state is going to tell you a clear picture what are the different GTIDs that are coming into this bin log at the moment. And then you have a current position, and then you have a slave position. So these two are probably the most confusing aspect of this GTID's picture, and most of the people don't really understand what exactly are these talking about. Even it took me a long time to realize what are these two variables for, or what do they represent, right? In reality. So now, so as you can see that there's a slave position, right? So there's a slave position of 10, 2000, this one. So whatever the number may be, we know that there's a slave position. And then similarly, if I go to, if I check for the GTIDs over here also, so this is also going to give us a similar picture, right? So this one is telling us that there's a slave position that is still 105124, and then there's a current position as 10,2,5125. So now what does this really means, right? So now we can see that there's a slave position is different and current position is different. So what do you get by this particular scenario? So looking at this picture, we know that this node is a slave, right? So from max scale we can already tell that. And similarly, if I do show slave status here, we can see that the GTID current GTID IO position is telling us 1,000, 10, 2,000, this one. So that is going to be the same as what you see in the max scale, right? So but not always, right? So that's also there's also a thing for that. So and then you don't see any other GTID in this picture, right? So in this status, you just see one GTID that is going to tell you the IO position. What does this IO position means? This IO position basically means that what is the last GTID that was received by this server, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that that GTID has been applied to the server, okay? So this GTID is basically pointing to, this GTID IO position is basically pointing to this bin log position, right? So meaning this bin log position, if you see that these two are the same. So this bin log position basically means that what is the bin log, latest bin log that has been received by this slave, which is this one. So this is not necessarily the GTID that has been applied to this server, okay? So that's an important thing here. And then if you look at the current position now, so now it's going to slowly give us a clearer picture. So remember, the bin log position is the last position, last bin log or last GTID that has been received by this particular node, right? And then this slave status is also going to show us the same number, right? So this also is the IO position, is not the position that has been applied to this slave yet, okay? So that's an important thing. So the last GTID received from the master, or whichever master it may be, or maybe as a master it has generated this number, right? So this is the latest GTID available in the bin log, basically. That's what we are trying to say. And then the current position is the latest position, the latest bin log applied to the database as a master, right? So if this node is a master, right? So which is the latest bin log position applied to this server, okay? So that is 10,2,5125. So remember, as a master, we created a new database which generated this 2000 ID, right? So that is why it is showing us that. But at that time, this node was a master. So its slave position is still showing the old number, meaning as a slave, what was the last bin log applied, right? So I hope that you guys are following. So the current position is always going to be what is the position, or what is the latest transaction, latest bin log transaction applied to this particular node as a master, meaning if this node was a master, then what was the latest GTID applied to it. And the GTID slave position is always going to be what is the latest bin log or latest transaction applied to this node through the replication process. Okay, so that's an important thing. So this slave position is always going to be what is the latest GTID applied to this particular node through replication, right? So the slave position, because slave by the name itself, it is clear that this GTID is for the slaves, right? So it's a slave position. So as a slave, what was the last GTID applied on this particular node? Okay, so if I were to do one more transaction here on this master, maybe let's create a new test database 3. Okay, so the database is created. Now we see immediately from 2000, this one is now following the current master. The current master, of course, is 1000 server ID. So we can already see that yes, the GTIDs are now following this number. So now remember this picture, right? So remember this picture. Now the bin log position was 2000 previously. The current position was 2000 also. The slave position was also 2000 for this node as a master. So if I do GTID again, we can see that yes, the current position is now, or the GTID position is now changed to 1000, right? So which is correct, because this is the position that is currently, this is the latest transaction that is available in the bin logs for this particular node, right? For this master. And then you will see the current position is also the same. So current position, of course, this is the last GTID that has been applied to the slave, to this particular master node. Okay, so this is an important concept here. So this 1000, 10, 1000, 512, 6 is the latest GTID that has been applied to this database already. Is not, no longer, we are no longer talking about what is the data in bin logs. No, we are talking about the actual data that has been applied to this database. So because if we created a new database, so if we do show databases now, we should see this database there. So it's no longer a transaction in bin log which has not been applied to the database. No, it's not that. It's the transaction that has been applied to the database as a master. So that is why we see here 10, 1000, 5126. But if you see the slave position is still the old one. So if I scroll up, is still the same one, right? So the slave did not change at all. Why? Because this node is not a slave, right? So this node is a master. So that is why we can see that as a master, we will expect the current position to increment always, but the slave position will not move at all. So the slave position will always tell us that what was the last slave, what was the last GTID applied to this node as a master. So let me do one thing. So I'm going to maybe going to run this sysbench very quickly. So this sysbench is just going to pump in some few thousand transactions to this particular node, 73. So the 73 is of course my master right now. So if I execute this one, you will see immediately that the GTIDs are running rapidly, right? So that's expected. So if I do this show global variable, we will see that we can clearly see the GTIDs have really moved forward, but the slave position has not moved at all, right? So that is understandable. That's what I wanted to show you, because this is the master, so it will always show you what was the last GTID that was applied as a slave on this node. So that was this particular number. So this is going to be very helpful if you want to investigate something. Then you know that what was the last GTID applied to this node as a slave, if this was a slave, for example. So if I go to my go to this session now and do a GTID variable list, we can see that yes, on a slave, the current position and the slave position will be the same, right? So that's an important thing. But on the slave, you can always refer to the slave position to be sure that what is the, because this is always going to tell you what is the latest GTIDs applied to this node as a result of replicating from a particular master. So this is the GTIDs applied to this node as a replication master. But what if we are doing some GTIDs or we are doing some transaction on the slave, right? So on the slave also, which is generally is not a good idea, because it will mess up your GTIDs and then you will have some collisions or some conflicts from GTIDs, and then your replication will break. So, but there's a way. We will do that in the next video probably on how to do a master replication. We will do that in the next maybe video. But for now, just remember that that on a slave, you are always supposed to refer to the slave position to identify or to tell what is the latest GTID that has been applied to this particular slave, right? Okay, let's do one more thing, show global status. So this number and this number might be different, right? So this number and this number might be different. If let's say you have a very, very busy server, right? So, and then you are, your master is generating transactions like crazy, meaning is pushing thousands and thousands of transactions per second, and then your slave is not able to catch up. So you may see that this number is higher, is going to be higher, but your slave position is slightly behind, right? So it's not exactly the same, which basically means that yes, your IO has been received, meaning your the bin log from the master has actually been received by the slave, but it has not been applied yet. So if you do a quick comparison of this number versus this number on the slave, you will see that how many transactions is your slave behind. So if let's say this is showing you as maybe 10,000, and then your slave is maybe showing you as 9559, then you know that it is something like maybe 400 transaction behind the master, right? So that's what it's going to do. Okay, so I think that's all about it for this particular video. And then in the next video, we will move a bit further and then explore about these GTIDs and how we can use these GTIDs and how do the GTIDs change for different scenarios, right? So we are going to do that in the next videos. Okay, so thank you guys, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Let's take a break, and then we will come back in the next video to talk about GTIDs more.